Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast, a conversation aimed at understanding all sides of mental health, addiction recovery, and homelessness. Each interview will include one's personal experiences and insights, or an expert's advice and knowledge within one of these fields. The goal is to promote awareness, guidance, and support for anyone who is affected by these challenges. Thank you all for listening. Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast. This is your host, Brendan.cutuli, and we are here today with Swey. Swey is a trauma survivor who has lived with anxiety and depression for years, and she has overcame the odds while becoming a mental health speaker and author, along with being a cognitive, behavioral, and holistic therapist. Swey joins the Mental Insights Podcast to speak about self-healing, self-therapy for therapists, and raising awareness for youth mental health in the Middle East. So this is episode number 19 of season 2 of the Mental Insights Podcast. So thank you, Swey, for being here with me today.
No, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation that's going to flow right through us.
Absolutely. I think so far it's been such a great time to getting to know you, and I think this is going to be a great time for people to learn more about how you're bringing such an awareness at a place and, at an avenue that really isn't getting much awareness. And, to start off this first part of the episode, we're really going to be bringing awareness in terms of what you've been able to heal through and, what people are facing in terms of where your demographics have really been from. And, to really start off, when did you really learn the importance of mental health? When did you come to terms of saying, all right, I need to understand what my mind is doing, what's happening internally within my mind in mental health?
So my journey with mental health has sort of been a rocky one from the get-go. I grew up in a family that was abusive, mentally and physically. So there was a lot of things going on where I couldn't focus on myself. And every time I wanted to focus on myself, it was really difficult. So the first thing that made it really difficult for me is that I come from different cultures. I come from 3 different cultures. So at my home, it was so difficult to even talk about something because in each of those cultures, it was like, what is mental health? Why are you suffering? What is this problem? And it made me feel so ashamed because being a third culture kid, even though I came from so many different cultures, I grew up in the UK. And at that time, when I was growing up, there were not many people that talked about mental health. And if they did, it was in a very like, oh, you've got an issue. Are you okay, love? There was this amount of sympathy that didn't allow people to actually understand that this is not an issue. It's just something everyone goes through. So that's where it sort of started. And then I went through this period where I began noticing that my mom has issues. My mom was dealing with a lot of trauma from her side, from her past, and so did my father. And they weren't being able to get the help because first, they didn't want to, and they were raised in a way that they were told that if you've got an issue, you've just got to tough it up, tough it out, tough it up, and just make sure nobody sees it, nobody hears it. Like, that's it. It was like voodoo to some people. So it was crazy because I grew up in that kind of environment, and I, at my age, I was a little more smarter than the rest of the kids. I always had a high IQ, and my teachers made me skip grades, and I kept on going about saying that I think there's something going on, and I would never label it as a problem. But because I kept saying that I think there's something going on, people would just look at me weirdly because there was nobody who was ready to talk about it. Then there came a time where the abuse and the mental and the physical abuse sort of burst out. It was one day where my father tried to kill me, and everything snapped in my head. I couldn't understand how can someone who knows that, okay, this is my child and I'm doing so much harm, how can someone not see and reflect into them and go like, I need to do something about this because I'm going to be destroying so many different relationships. When that happened, there was one specific thing that really broke my heart. So when my dad tried to kill me, I remember I was bleeding out and he just kept on hitting me, kept on stabbing me. And at one point, he just stopped because I stopped crying. My emotions went void. I just stopped feeling anything because that was my reaction, mentally and physically, that okay, this is it. I'm going to go now. I hope I reach in heaven. But when he stopped because he saw that I stopped reacting. And I think there was the pivot, like, okay, I think we've exhausted Swey way too much. I think everyone saw it in their own ways and they processed it their own way. Then when it was time for me to go to the hospital, I didn't ask for it, but my mom and my dad started fighting, like, we've got to take her to the hospital. My dad's like, no, they're going to find out that I did this to her. So the priority, and me being the person who was impacted by this, I was just like, are you bloody serious? Like, I am bleeding out on the phone and you are arguing about if I get to go to the hospital because of whatever is going on with you guys. Eventually, my mom drove me to the hospital. And this is the part that broke my heart because I knew that she was fighting an internal battle. She was suffering with depression and suicidal tendencies herself. And 80% of what she was suffering was sort of reflected onto me, which I think till date is impacting me in so many different ways. But basically, in the car, she told me, don't tell anyone that it was your father. Tell them you fell off the stairs and your heel went into your eye. Because my left eye was swollen. It was so bad. And I looked at my mom and my heart broke. My heart broke because I was like, I don't even have your support. I don't even have your help. She did not come into the hospital with me. I went into the emergency section myself. And I was just 14, Brendan. I was just 14. So for me, in that moment, I had to grow up 10 years immediately. The doctors asked me, and I remember that moment so clearly because I lied. I lied because there was still a part of me that wanted to not break my mom's heart. And there was still a part of me that thought, because I was an empath, and that's when I realized I was an empath, there was a part of me that was like, I don't want to put my dad through this or send him through whatever, because I think he does have unresolved issues. So ever since then till now, obviously I've cut ties with everyone, and it was a very difficult decision. Even now when I talk about it, my heart gets heavy, but it was so important. Otherwise I wouldn't have healed. I wouldn't have made that step. I left home when, like 2 years after, I saved up as much as I could, and I left home because I just couldn't do it. And I knew that it would be the best decision and best option if all of us just separated for a little bit. That's where I came into this demographic. I came to Dubai. I got my first job here, and as an educator, I was a special educator for 6 years. So over here, I realized the Middle East is very similar to what I was going through. There were women who I was working with that were oppressed in so many different ways. And I don't even just mean in the domestic violence aspect, but mentally they were facing so many challenges because, one, the stigma is so heavy, especially on the men here. And it's double fault for the women here, because they think that, oh, okay, if I even open my mouth, it's my fault. And then I had students, and I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm an empath. And every time a student came up to me and told me that, you know what, my father does this, my boyfriend does this, I think they're right. My heart shattered even further. And I remember I was the youngest on the team, and I worked here for one of the best schools. I had pride that, okay, they will be able to solve the issues that we're facing here. So I would go up to my superiors and I'd be like, listen, this is what's going on and I want to help. And this is what they told me. They were like, we can't because we don't want to defame the brand, the business. And I stayed for, I think, a year more. And after that, I couldn't stomach it. I just couldn't stomach staying there. So I left and I started working on my own advocacy and started reaching out to people that I knew I had connections from before. And I started telling them, like, listen, we need to talk about this. I started doing projects, and that's where I sort of realized that I could do something about my writing, because writing has always been self-healing, the most essential self-healing thing for me. For me to journal my thoughts and sort of put it in a way that when I look at it, it still seems beautiful, so I don't seem broken. That made me feel like, okay, there's something in me that is worth being cherished. So yeah, I started writing books and I started doing events where I'm speaking, and I reached out to parts of communities here that weren't just children, but women as well, because I feel the biggest issue here is that the women just don't want to talk because they're so scared, because they think they're invalid. And I realized if I can start reaching out to that, I'm pretty sure they can start saying the same things in their own narratives to the next generation, which is the youth. So that's basically been my story with my way of going about it.
Absolutely. I thank you so much for sharing that, Sway. It's, in one aspect, such a blessing that you're here to even share it today. I'm so grateful for that. And as well, I think it truly shows, the invaluable lessons that you've been able to really bring about through many of the challenges that you've been able to face and overcome, and now have been able to bring about it in many other people's lives, which, as you've been saying, there's a lot of stigma. There's still a lot of work to be done, but the steps that you're taking now, I think, are that initiative that we need. We need more people like yourself, and it does obviously take people to experience some of the issues at hand that you have come to play. And as you're seeing, it's still going to happen. Many people are going to face these traumas, unfortunately, but as you look at it, generational trauma is real. When parents experience it, they bring it on their children. And if someone like yourself doesn't do that work, doesn't take that initiative, you could be put in that same step, and you could be putting that upon your children, which has been happening for many generations thus far. And you broke the cycle, which I think is such a great thing. And we need more people to realize that and to take that initiative, take that step, because that can be passed down for many generations. And we see it all over the world happening today. This trauma is just a cycle. And if someone doesn't heal through themselves, they're not going to be able to support or heal their child, their partner, whoever it is in their life that they can help support.
Exactly.
I think trauma is like one of, if not the biggest cause of people suffering from depression, anxiety. It causes so many debilitating issues within someone. Mental health is truly not a joke. And as you stated, that kind of, when you experienced that trauma, when you were in that point of facing life or death, you learned something. You kind of looked within yourself and saw, what can I come out of this from? What can I do? Your kind of response was no response. Be there, be within yourself. And can you share a little bit more of, what can we learn from being at our darkest place? What can we learn from, even as you experience, from facing death? What kind of lessons, what kind of experiences were you able to visually and perceptually see and understand, all right, what can I do to move forward?
So for me, when that happened, even prior to that incident, because I had so much, I was still going through physical abuse. Before that incident, it never came to the point that he was going to kill me. And it wasn't just his physical abuse, it was my mother's mental outbursts at me. I remember every time it was my birthday and I knew my birthdays, I wanted to spend it with people that I actually felt good around. And with my family, I never felt that. So every year on my birthday, when I wanted to go spend with anyone else in the world, my mom would say, no, you should spend it with family. Why? And then she would start telling me about what she went through. So to give you a little bit of backstory, my mother, when she was pregnant with me, in my father's culture, having a girl is a bad omen. So when they found out that I was a girl in her, they tried to flush me out. And my mother really fought for that. And she went through a lot of abuse during her pregnancy with me, and even prior to her pregnancy with me from my father's side. So it was this cycle that she went through where they kept on, because she wasn't part of his culture. She was from like completely other side of the world. My mom was Arab and my father was Asian. So 2 worlds apart. So they didn't accept her. There was a lot of physical, mental, emotional abuse. And every year on my birthday, she would tell me this story, and she would tell me, you should be grateful to your father and me for bringing you into this world. And I know in the deepest part of my heart, because my mother is no longer here today, that she was in pain and she was trying to reach out, but I just wasn't the best person at that time to reach out. For me, I was so young, I just couldn't get. And to me, it always felt like, why? I know you gave up a lot for me to be here, but this is depressing. This makes me want to go and do something to myself that I should not even be thinking about at this age, or at any age, be it. So that kept on happening. And I started doing a lot of self-harm. I went through this phase in my early teens, even tweens, till my late teens, where I just went through a lot of self-harm. I started to do things to myself that I just didn't like, but it was the only thing that sort of numbed away the other pain, you know? And I had relationships at that time, very abusive relationships, not physically, but emotionally and mentally. And I kept on allowing it to happen because it made me feel as though, okay, now I can look at a different problem so I can forget this one. I wanted to space out my energy in all the wrong pots. And I knew I was doing it, but it felt like it was the only thing to do because nobody else told me otherwise. When I left home, I was homeless for a little bit, obviously, because I left home at such a young age. I began realizing that I don't have to do the self-harm to put out all the fires that are in my head. And I approached a therapist friend who was a few years older than me. She had already graduated and stuff like that. And she took me to someone who she knew really well. And that's when I was sort of diagnosed. I was diagnosed at age 12 as well, but my parents really didn't give me any help. They didn't take care of me. And it was reconfirmed when I went again after I left home. I was diagnosed with depression, and severe anxiety. And that was it. Things started to make sense. Like, okay, I've been through the trauma, but even prior to it, when everything was happening to me, the dark side was just my shadow self. And I didn't know these terminologies back then. And the aspect of therapy or aspect of self-help or any help from outside was so different. It was very technical. It was very big words, which girl like me at that age was just like, I don't get it. I don't get it. But I ended up doing a psychology major to understand it better myself, not just to help myself, but to everybody else, because I knew it was important. But 16, 17, I started realizing and I started having this spiritual growth. And when I say spiritual growth, I don't mean religious growth. I mean law of attraction. I mean the universe. I mean energy and all that good stuff. And I began realizing that maybe philosophy and psychology coexist a lot more than people think. And maybe I can use this for myself. So that's where my self-healing journey began. And that's where I started I use the term sober, but I started getting sober from the self-harm, and I started redirecting the dark spots in my life to positive areas. So I broke off all the negative relationships that I was in, even after the trauma. And I began realizing that dependency has categories. Dependency on another person has categories. Dependency on myself has categories. I can't depend on myself too much. And it was so difficult to explain that to other people because I was going through this discovery and on this ride on my own. But once I began realizing this, I still have dark days. I still have days where I feel like I want to go back and do that. But I've made so many positive changes ever since because I was open to knowledge. And I think that's what people miss out. They're not open to the knowledge that the world is ready to give us. And it's how we interpret that knowledge, which has been the biggest thing for me. Like someone can tell me that A is for apple, but the way I look at apple is going to be so different to the way someone else is going to be looking at an apple. And I think that is the most important thing. The way I began interpreting these things in my life, whatever was coming at me was so important because it started showing me who I really am and what I really need to do to get to a better stage or be at a more zen present, if you get what I mean. So now I'm at a stage where I'm in a relationship where I'm married and my husband has gone through his own trauma. And trust me, when prior to this, I always thought, and everybody used to tell me that you should be with someone who's a little more stable. And excuse my French, but now I'm at that stage where I'm like, fuck that. Why? We are in such a respectable relationship because we have healed so much. We have, we've done an exorcism on everything that's negative, and we're so focused on healing ourselves. And we know our boundaries so well that even through the dark days, he's there to hold my hand. He won't tell me that, oh, you shouldn't do it. But he's there to hold my hand to tell me that I'm here and you can do this. You get what I'm saying? And I think that's the journey that everyone should kind of focus on. It's not going to go away in one day. You could be 50, you could be 60, and you're still going to go through things, and you're still going to have the imprints on you from whatever happened in your life. And that's a given. But it's so important to remember that we're evolving. We're ever evolving. And our trauma doesn't weigh our worth, nor does it define us. And to people who don't get it, sure, give the energy to educate them. But that's basically it. The rest of the energy should be for you. That's basically it.
Absolutely. I love that, Sway. And, to really bring about why I think, your way of looking at things, being curious, being open to that knowledge is probably one of the biggest, aspects of how you were able to heal and educate yourself at such a quick measure compared to, other people as they go through some of these challenges. It takes them a bit longer to start to understand of why they should take these positive steps, how they can make, these opportunities actually created into action. I think that's what a lot of people struggle with is we can have these resources around us. They can be out there for us. People can be there to support us, but the work is in your action. The work is in what you do. And that's the initial step. And it definitely shows in terms of, taking that first step of you being curious, you being open to, all right, I'm going to make a change, and then actually doing it. And it certainly shows that you took that tenfold of being able to educate yourself and now being able to do it to other people. And you spoke a little bit about what were kind of some foundational aspects of what brought you into educating yourself, finding some sense of healing, and what kind of self-healing techniques did you learn while you're going through this time? What kind of activities or creative measures were there for you to really look within yourself and heal throughout some of these processes?
So in a nutshell, the things that I did, and I've actually told a few people to do them who came to me for help, and it did work, but one size doesn't fit all. So It's how you interpret it. Again, this is the biggest thing that I say. For me, my activities didn't really matter as much as what was going on in my head mattered. Every day when I went to bed, I had a moment of self-reflection. And it was very important to me that when I self-reflected, I either wrote it down or I was speaking to myself. I don't have to see myself, but I was just speaking to myself, having whatever I was thinking put out into the universe, you know. And like, why I say put out in the universe is because energy is basically waves. Energy is waves. And I wanted whatever I said, whether it's negative or positive in my head, to just go out and see what can repel each other. And my self-reflection at night helped me so much, because I would say, okay, this is the bad thing that happened, this is the good thing that happened. And excuse me, whenever I kept on saying it to myself, I would find that corner in each of them, how they fit as a puzzle. And I began realizing, like, okay, if I keep doing this, I can find the answers that I'm looking for myself. So self-reflection is the biggest thing. You can journal it, you can say it out loud, but it's going to help you to the point that it will make you realize that your problems are in, your answers are in your problems. You just need to sort of make sure that you say it enough and in a way that you're truly in tune with yourself. Another thing that I did was every morning, because I have anxiety and I had severe depression, and I still do, and I still do this today. When I wake up, I take a little time to give my body what it needs. And I listen to my body. I don't think many people do that. If my body tells me, you know what, I need a few more minutes to get off bed, I'm going to set a boundary for myself in my head, like, okay, a few more minutes. What is a few more minutes for me? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 2 minutes? I set that time in my head and I enjoy that time. I stay present in it. I don't think that I'm wasting my day. I'm like, okay, this is positive, because there are days that my body doesn't need that 5 extra minutes. And when I wake up with that mindset and I give myself that boundary that, okay, if I need that 2 or 3 extra minutes, I'm going to be present in that 2 or 3 extra minutes. Whether I'm going through social media, whether I'm cuddling my husband, or whether I'm just looking out, you know, of the window and looking at the sky, I'm going to take it in. And all my thoughts that are going on in my head, I keep it there. I listen to those voices. And then when I wake up, when I'm in the restroom and I'm doing an activity, let's say brushing my teeth, I look into the mirror and I volumize those questions and those thoughts. So literally I'm looking at the mirror and my thoughts are going like, you know what, I should have done this. And I keep bobbing my head, because I'm now acknowledging things that I did yesterday. I'm validating myself. Emotions that I'm feeling today, I'm validating. And everything positive. Let's say I'm saying that, you know, I wish the client that I was working on yesterday just says yes today. And immediately when I have that thought, I'm like, yeah, you're going to get that client. You're definitely going to get that client. You just need to make sure you put in the work. So that helped me. And other than that, I don't know how many people know this, but I started getting into tarot cards. And I know that there's a huge myth about them, but the way I use tarot cards is sort of, again, self-reflection. It's just another way of self-reflecting. I do a tarot read and it helps me journal my thoughts. It helps me sort of see like, okay, this card says this, and I start to interpret it. This is what I've been saying. How you can do so many things. You can go for a run, you can write, you can, you know, take a drink or take a puff, but whatever it is, as long as it's helping you interpret your life in your vision, you're doing the right thing. So things worked out for me, and I'm pretty sure there are many other things that are going to work out for different people, but it really matters how you're interpreting whatever you're doing. If you're having, for example, today, before this podcast, I took the time to feel good about myself, because I know the conversation I'm going to have is probably going to make me feel heavy at some point. So I told myself, I validate my emotions. My reality was the truth for me. And I know that sharing my story is going to, even though it's going to be a 0.001% of, a vantage point for someone out there, I know that letting it out into the universe is going to bring me some good. And after this podcast is done, I'm going to do some journaling. I'm going to think about it. And I know that that self-reflection is going to make me feel 10 times more productive, 10 times more in Zen and grounded. So there's a few things other than tarot reading. I got into crystals because, again, I'm a huge energy believer. So I got into crystals, journaling, and a little bit of meditation. That's basically it.
Awesome. So it certainly shows there's many different avenues in which you can find healing, but the overall theme is really looking within yourself, trying to see your thoughts and actions, and whatever it may be for someone, like you're saying, interpret what you're doing, seeing how you're going about this. And every day is a little bit different. If you don't have the best session of journaling, of taking that time to meditate, you just need to understand, journal a little bit, and see what you can do better tomorrow. And that's really all that we should ask of ourselves. We're not, as you said earlier, we're not going to fix it in a day, but it's taking that time. It's, as long as we're putting forth effort to make that change, that's really where it happens.
Because the bottom line is that we are our biggest motivators, and we are our biggest inspiration. And I think there's so much. We're just as sacred and full of wonders, like the universe that we're in. And it's so much fun to like unlock those little bits of you. Like, oh, okay, I didn't know. To be honest, for years I was so into tea, and then I came into the Middle East and I met a few people, and I just got into coffee. It's these little things that you find out about yourself, and I love that. And I think that's the most important thing. Like, that's the key line of everything that you do in self-healing. That's the most important thing, to make sure that you're listening to yourself, what's up here, what's in your heart, and what your body's telling you. And once you're in tune with all of that, even though there are going to be waves going up and down, you will find that you're never going to stray from your path. And if you do, you will find your way back.
Absolutely. It's great advice. I love that, because it really shows how, all of us, as we're going throughout our lives, we do get, pulled away, and we don't kind of look within ourselves. But when you're able to really find, whether it's an environment, whether it's, your surrounding people, your friends, you can really see about, who you truly are. Even if it's taking that time within yourself of being somewhere, you can really find out these things that you might not have known for the past 20, 10, who knows how many years, that you haven't really been able to uncover. And finding out these things is kind of this, awakening. You start to understand, all right, I may not have been that person that my ego was driving me down to say. I start to learn these new things about myself, which I think if people do go on this healing journey, they can start to really understand about who they truly are, starting to find out, what's really to come, what path is truly that they are on. And I think that's the beauty of this journey, is you can learn so much about yourself, even if you have to face some of those past events, face some of those traumas that you've experienced, but it brings about such a whole new light, such a whole new person of yourself, which is definitely the best.
Definitely, because there's this one thing I remember you said about, I'm just going to quickly go anchor on that. You said generational trauma, generational, mentality is a huge thing. It's true. And, in self-healing, you kind of, whether you're self-healing or you're healing with someone else, or you're going to someone for healing, through this, I think there are times you're going to realize that even the negative actions you're doing is a call for help. I am a hardcore Aries, and I don't really believe in the signs, but I have all the traits of an Aries. So for me, if I get too upset, I start yelling. And sometimes after I'm done yelling, even if it's not at anyone, it's myself, I am so harsh on that part of myself that yelled. But in truth, that's my shadow self that's just acting out because I haven't been doing and putting in all that work from my inner child to feel that, okay, this is a safe space. You can come out and play now. And that's what, the self-healing journey kind of shows us, that no matter what you do, even if it's the negative things about you, stop being so harsh on yourself. Okay, I had an argument with someone, but let me look at my viewpoint as well. Just as much as I'm giving that person, the respect to go through their viewpoint, why am I being so harsh on myself? Why did that trigger me so much? Why did that conversation trigger me for me to get to that point that I started yelling? It's these questions that we need to ask ourselves. Why did I start crying? Why did I feel like I wanted to punch that? Even if I haven't, like, why did I feel like I wanted to do that? If we don't ask these questions, we'll never know why the trauma still hurts. And that's important. For me, throughout, even when I'm doing negative things, at the end of the day, I have to ask myself, why did I do it? I'm not going to ask myself in a stern way, because I'm giving that energy to myself. And if I'm giving negative energy to myself, and if I'm putting myself down, trust me, the next day I see it happening from someone else, because I've allowed my space from me to become negative. The very next day I'm seeing someone else taking and coming into that space and saying, you know what, Swey, and they're being harsh on me, but I don't deserve it, right? So these are the important things. You just need to keep self-reflecting and asking yourself why you do the things you do, why you want the things you want, and why you feel the way you feel. And you'll just hear those knobs turning and doors opening up. So yeah.
Absolutely. It's definitely, it's so valuable to ask those questions and to have that reflection. That's where truly the growth happens, where you start to understand why you're doing these things, because the subconscious can bring us down into many different avenues that we can't truly become aware of unless we ask those questions, which is, such a great way to take those steps. And you spoke a little bit about some of the challenges that are being faced within the Middle East today, but I want you to take this time to share more about the challenges that the youth are facing within the Middle East, and what are some ways that we can help break these barriers and help provide more support for the children in the Middle East today?
So the kids and the youth in the Middle East, they're completely unaware. Even though there is a rift of change going on here after the pandemic, everyone's taking it so much more seriously. But because Middle East has now become a hub for all different countries to sort of come in, but the majority that I hear are the cultures that are still having stigmas about mental health. So we've got in the Middle East, not just the Emiratis and the locals themselves that live here, but we've got Bengalis, Pakistanis, all sorts of Asians, and everyone in their own cultures have some sort of stigma about mental health. So if we try to pinpoint on just one aspect, there's so many different cultural problems that come up, and they're not one culture. That's the problem. Over here, the culture itself is so diluted because there's so many different cultures mixed that you don't know where the root is sometimes. For me, the best approach that I have studied and seen is that to give the youth over here a space to actually talk. In my years of teaching, when I was teaching 11th and 10th grade, the kids would act out if we treat them of their age. And I get that. I was like that once upon a time. But when I welcome them into coming into that space where I can speak to them as a friend and sort of tell them, like, listen, you're a bud. You're a buddy to me. And whatever you have on your mind, you can say it without any filter. Go ahead. Because they're not allowed that at home. 80% of more than 80% actually, the kids here don't talk to their parents. They don't have that connection with their parents. They don't have the connection with their families. So where else do they go? They start hanging out with their friends, and that's where the bad groups and the good groups start happening, and you start doing bad things and good things, and everything becomes a gray area. So the biggest thing over here to help is to give space to the youth to talk about what they're going through, because how youth was for us, let's say our generation back then, is so different to how the youth is right now. They have a stronger voice, but it's just that the space that they were getting, and they were seeing that other youth in their own time, having the space to talk about, was so limited. Right now in the Middle East, in Dubai, where I'm staying, I had the privilege to come across this person who is a founder of this great enterprise that's going on here, and they're supporting the youth by making their futures a little more certain. So now, because of the COVID-19, jobs are going to be a lot less. So the solution is to empower the youth to become their own founders. They become entrepreneurs themselves, because that is where the future is. But they don't have the guidance. They don't have the help that they need. So right now, what Middle East is doing, and I think it's amazing that they're doing this, is by creating initiatives, even if it's in a small scale. I know that not many people are doing it because there are so many political reasons of what they're doing. But personally, in my circle and the people that I've met with and the people that I keep in my network, they're really trying hard to make sure that the youth have a space to build their own foundations, build their own futures, where they feel protected and safe. And sometimes you just start that by having a conversation with them, an open conversation with them. You will be surprised how they could start talking about their favorite game on Xbox and then end up talking about how their dad is whatever, and it's up to us, because we've had more experience. We've been through a lot more. We've seen a lot more to interpret that while keeping their narrative true to what they're saying, to go through whatever they're saying to figure out, like, okay, what is it that we can help? But if we don't give them the respect, because the youth today is so much more smarter and 10 times more out there. They're doing things. I know an entrepreneur who's all the way in Canada who has his own thing going on, and he's just 18, Brendan. I used to teach that. So it's amazing that times have changed, and we need to change the way we talk to the youth and not really treat them as kids or children, and give them the chance to prove themselves to themselves, not to us, to themselves. They need that push. And if we're going to be like, oh, you know what, you stay at it, go talk to your parents, we know that's a dead end. We know that parents are not going to listen. So if we get it, why not give them that hand and let them come to us and find their own way in life? So that's one very important thing. And the second thing is, right now, with everything going on, the pandemic and what's going on in the US, it isn't just about one person or one kind of community of youth that we need to reach out to, because the youth are strong. And I realized that when I saw how things changed around me. Even kids who have never spoken to each other around the globe, they became one unit. If you're going to be making changes for one part of the world, you better make sure that's happening all around the world, because the youth, they feel like they need each other that way, because that's what they've seen with us, right? We've talked so much about empowerment and being true to ourselves and yada yada yada. The youth right now in the world, if we want to make mental health and mental well-being of importance in one part of the community, we need to make sure that that's everywhere. And that way we're not, what's the best word to say this, but I'm going to say it as bluntly as possible. We're not canceling any other communities in all of this, because over here, if we start looking at the mental health for locals, over here how it goes is that if you're a local and if you're an expatriate, you don't get all the things that the locals do, which is sad. If anyone who's listening to this, who's lived in Dubai for a while, if you're an expat here, your worth is not that much. So if we're really looking at the changes for mental health over here, it has to be on international basis. None of the laws here actually apply for youth all around. They just, if they're going to be making those changes, they're going to be making it for their own people. But when we say own people, what do we really mean? You're my people. My husband is my people, right? And the youth want to see this. If they're not going to see it, they're always going to feel like they're in a slump. So before we even talk about any other conversation, all the root sort of comes to one place. And I think that's where we need to send more traffic towards, making sure it's all the same everywhere. That's basically it.
Well said, Sway. I greatly appreciate that. And within the next episode, we will be getting a little more insight in terms of your future hopes for mental health. But for now, I want to thank you for being here today. And for everyone listening, this was part 1 of episode number 19 of season 2 of the Mental Insights podcast with Sway and your host, Brendan.Cutuli. So thank you all for being here, and be sure to tune into the next episode. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Mental Insights podcast. Make sure to reach out to today's guest or myself if you need any advice, guidance, or support in your life today. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and review to this podcast so we know what you thought of this episode. I look forward to being in touch with you all in the next episode. I hope you all have a wonderful day.